In this video, we're going to continue setting up the VR controller. The next thing we need to do is add the reticle to the main camera. So let's open up UI here, and you'll find the GVR reticle right there. And in our third-person controller, glasses, camera position, GVR main, head, main camera, we're going to drag in the reticle. The reticle needs an event system in order to drive it, but we don't want to use any event system. We want to use a gaze input event system. Come up to Game Object and go to UI and create an event system. You notice here we have this standalone input module. We don't want that. Remove that component and add another component. If you type gaze in here, it'll filter and you'll see this gaze input module. That's what we want to drive this system. This is also a good time just to come up to mobile input and disable it. We don't want mobile input. We want standard desktop input for a VR game. The one other thing we need is a physics ray caster. And if we come to the camera and we come up to component and we come to event, we can get the physics ray caster there. And this is going to cast a ray into the scene from the camera, which is basically where the eyes of the character are. Now that we have the event system and the ray caster, we can actually see events in action. If we pick something, for example, if we pick the love seat here, and we add onto the love seat an event trigger, so component, event trigger, and on that event trigger, we add two new event types, a pointer enter and a pointer exit. Then when we run the game, we're actually going to see something happen. I'm going to simulate head tracking by holding down the Option key and watch the reticle in the center of the screen. You see how it expands as I go over the love seat? And that's because the love seat is tied now into the event system. Now we can make this even more visual with a little script. Come up here to scripts and just pick any one of them. It doesn't matter which one. We're just going to create a new C# script and we're going to call it gaze highlight. And then double click gaze highlight to open it up in Mono Develop. Now we want it to implement the gaze interface. So there's a thing called GVR gaze responder. And that's the interface that we want to implement. And then we're going to have a static game object, a public static game object. And it's going to be called highlighted object. And this is going to allow other scripts to just access the currently highlighted object. So basically this is going to be the object that we're gazing at. I'm just going to create a little helper method here, and it is going to be private. Not going to return anything, and it's going to be called setGazeAt. And it's going to take a Boolean, true or false. Just call it a flag for now. And what this is going to do is it's going to take care of highlighting the object that we're looking at. It's going to do something very simple. It's going to do a get component. And the type of component that we want to get is the renderer. And what we're going to do with the renderer is we're going to get its material. And what we're going to do with the material is we're going to get its color. And then we're going to assign a value to this color based on this flag being either true or false. We're going to go with color green or color red. Actually color gray, not color red. Let's go with gray. So that's just a very simple helper. And then when this script starts up, we're just going to set the gaze at to false. In other words, we're not gazing at anything, or at least we're not gazing at this object when the method starts. We can get rid of this update. And now we're going to have two other methods, well, actually three I guess. We'll have a public void on gaze enter. And that's not going to take any parameters. And we're going to have a public void on gaze exit. Again, that's not going to take any parameters. And we're going to have a public void on gaze trigger. And that's what will be invoked if the trigger is pressed or the fire button is pressed when we're looking at an object. And all we're going to do is, if we're looking at an object, we're going to use this helper method that we created, set gaze at, and we're going to pass true in there, saying, yeah, we're gazing at this object. And that's going to set its color. And we're also going to set this highlighted object equal to the game object that we're gazing at. And for on gaze exit, we're going to just set this to false. So set gaze at, and that's going to be false. And since we're not gazing at anything, the highlighted object can be set to null. We could fill this script out. There's lots of other things you can do in this script, but for now that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to save this script, and I'm going to come back to Unity. And now I'm going to apply this script to our love seat on these poly surfaces. So we'll just drag the gaze highlight script onto that poly surface, and the gaze highlight onto that poly surface. And now back here in these events, we're going to add two new events on each of these, because we want to talk to these two objects. And we're going to talk to this poly surface and this poly surface, and the same down here. And what we're going to say is, we're going to say, using this new gaze highlight script, on gaze enter, and the same for this one, using the gaze highlight script, on gaze enter. And similarly for this one here, gaze highlight on gaze exit. And again, gaze highlight on gaze exit. Now let's take a look when we run the game. And you'll notice we're not looking at the love seat. So it's kind of colored gray. It's a little bit darker, but now I'm going to simulate head movement. And there, as you can see, when we look at it, now it gets colored green. So not only do we get the reticle expanding, but we get the object that we're looking at colored green. I just noticed there's a couple of console messages down here, and these actually have to do with the doors. We could fix this, but again, it's not all that important. So if you just find the doors in your scene, you can disable those doors. We don't need them enabled. And that will get rid of these console messages. Now that we have all of the things in place to highlight the objects that we want to gaze at, we need to go through this scene and set up all of the objects that we want to gaze at. That's going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to end this video here, and we're going to come back and we're going to continue and set up all of the gaze event handling in the next video in this series.